Okay. All right, guys. It's me again, and boy, I have a quite a video for you. So, do you guys remember about 10 years ago, back in 2015, when Donald Trump announced his presidency and he came down the Golden Escalator in Trump Tower, and he gave a speech, and in this speech, just like the famous speech, it was it's like probably the one line that's most remembered was like when Mexico sends their people, they're not sending their best. You know, and I remember like part of it's like, I imagine some are good people, but when they send their people, they're sending rapists and killers or whatever. Okay. I remember back at this time, I was not like a Trump supporter. There had been rumors that like he was going to be running. Essentially, all he was at that time was like he was President Obama's like arch nemesis, and they would take digs at each other. He was the one who first proposed that like Obama wasn't born in America, and that he was had immigrant parents, and there's been some evidence of that, but who cares? But at that point, I was not like a big Donald Trump supporter. But what I realized was like when he gave that speech, the very next day, and I'm going to read that speech because something really important has sort of come to light like 10 years later. But when he gave that speech, the next day I remember like all the news organizations, this was like right before the media started being referred to as like the legacy media or the fake news media, or they still were like had some credibility. Like people weren't fully like exposed to the fact that they're just blatant like propaganda mouthpieces for the Democratic Party. And and this was like this was across the board. This wasn't just like CNN and MSNBC. This was like I remember the very next day, after he gave that speech, that Time magazine came out with their headline was Donald Trump called Donald Trump called Mexicans rapists, and that was their title. And I mean, I had watched the speech the night before, and I remember him definitely saying that there could like we don't know who they're sending, but they're not sending their best, right? But I remember hearing that and being like, that's not. I don't think I recall him saying that like all Mexicans are rapists, and he didn't say that. He was talking about. First of all, he wasn't talking about American citizens, so that completely excludes all Hispanic people or Mexicans that are American citizens. So there's that subgroup, right? So it's he wasn't calling all Mexicans rapists. He was differentiating the difference between citizens and non-citizens. And then of that group, of that subset, he was talking about the two different groups. There's Mexicans that are here legally, non-citizens, but who went through the process and did it legally. And then there's the people who did it illegally. And so he wasn't talking about the legal non-citizens. He was talking about the illegal non-citizens. And then he like further divided that subgroup. He wasn't, and he said, like, I assume that some are good people, right? And then that's when he started talking about, like, we don't know who they are. There's not a vetting process. Some are rapists. Some are committing crimes, drug dealers, whatever. And that was like the very first time that I saw a complete disconnect between like what I was seeing with my eyes and what I was hearing the news report back to me. And that, like I said, that was Time Magazine. I had grown up sort of like in a time when like Time Magazine and Forbes and like US News, and it was like magazines always seemed to be like credible to me. Even Rolling Stone, for whatever reason, like uh, Peter O'Rourke, and I just always like looked up to the journalists who were like in print, because it seemed like for whatever reason it sounded like seemed like the perception from me, probably not true, was that they did their research, right? So that was like in Time Magazine, and I remember over the next couple months, like that's when the attack on the legitimacy of Donald Trump started. And in hindsight, I now see that it was the full machine. It was the deep state that had waged war on Trump. He was a self-funded candidate, and which means that he was a threat to the multinational corporations that basically buy politicians. They fund their campaigns, and then when they get elected and they're in office, they owe them their loyalty, right? And I just remember that when Trump was sort of going through all that, and not like there was like I'm sure a lot of people had noticed that what we were being told wasn't the truth. But that started me like right off the bat, like feeling that Trump wasn't getting a fair shake. And by the time the Russian collusion hoax was introduced, I mean that was early in his first presidency. I was a full Trump supporter. Like I've been MAGA since day one. And it's like, I don't know if you guys remember, but it's not always been popular to be like a Trump supporter. Like you definitely, I remember like people would like on Facebook call me like, a racist because I would defend Trump. Anyway, so what I want to do is I want to read what he wrote, because what he wrote, or not what he wrote, but what he said in his speech, because what he said and what is materialized, especially since Joe Biden basically like threw the immigration gates wide open, and they just started allowing like people to just swarm in and get a court date and then just melt into the American population, with like 95% of people that have asylum claims get denied, right? And like 10% or something actually show up for their dates. So, of a group that's enormous, they're talking about in Biden's presidency, there were 12.5 million people that came into the country. And those are the knowns and the gotaways, right? And gotaways are people that they like were picked up on drone footage or on some sort of, they were seen, but they got away, right? They were not identified. So that's the thing to know about. I mean, those are the ones that actually were captured on camera, or were seen by a border patrol agent or some, whatever. They think the real number is probably 20 million, which is like Chicago, New York combined and more. Like that's a lot of people. So so I'm going to read you his speech, and then we're going to talk about the dude who lit that lady on fire on the subway. Because when I just read what this dude was, what the report, like we hadn't heard anything about this dude until like literally today. And now it's coming out that this guy was like drinking all day, chain smoking, K2, which is spice, which is the shit that's like a synthetic cannabinoid, and sort of legal. Like you can buy it in like head shops, and but it makes you absolutely fucking crazy. And I've worked in a detox here in Phoenix a few years back, and the people that were coming in off spice they were way worse than the people like detox or coming off meth or coke or heroin or any of that shit. The spice smokers were absolutely homicidal. No, I wouldn't even say suicidal, but homicidal, cannibalistic. I mean, nuts. I mean, the kind of people that would chew their fingers and their hands off. That it was just insane what these people would do, and it's it's illegal because what they do is they like the cannabinoid receptors in the body don't take well to synthetic cannabinoids. Our body throughout the last several thousands of years have developed cannabinoid receptors from youth, and our body processes it. But it's the synthetic, like when the scientists start getting involved with like changing molecular structures around it, our bodies are not they're not built to handle that shit, and it completely fries the brain and whatnot. And the way that the developers, the manufacturers of this shit get away with it is every time the legislature like cracks down on a specific drug, the manufacturer alters like a molecule, and it changes the entire structure. And because everything takes forever in government to get changed, for laws to be proposed, to go into effect, to be voted on, it just takes forever. And so by the time you stomp one drug out, another one pops up, and so you're constantly playing whack-a-mole with like these synthetic drugs, these K2s, crocodile, even fentanyl, which is a synthetic opiate. And they're just the most dangerous drugs. I mean, it's like it makes shit like heroin and cocaine like actually seem safe. Like, even though they're not. I'm not saying anything about any drugs being safe. I'm absolutely stone cold sober. Don't smoke weed, don't drink alcohol, none of it. But I mean, compared to the drugs that are derived from actual plants, heroin with like poppies and cocaine with like coca leaves, the synthetics are way gnarlier. The spice, the K2, the synthetic marijuana, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, so here's what Trump said. Trump said, okay, I'm just going to read the entire speech, and then we're going to get, and now think about like as things are happening, like as things have developed with like Lincoln Riley being killed by two illegal immigrants that had been in the country for less than like 2 weeks, raped and murdered. I forgot the mother of five that was out jogging, and she was kidnapped and killed, murdered, raped. And, these are people that have no business being here. And because the Democratic Party was trying to import voters, change demographics, realizing that their policies have completely failed Americans, have just instead of changing policies and offering an agenda that makes the lives of the citizens better, they just simply figure they'll just import 12 million, call any sort of like voting ID law racist, even though that's like one of the that's one of the proposals that like more Americans agree on than anything. Because whether you're left or right, you realize like your vote should actually matter, and diluting your vote and your say with like 20 million people that don't pay taxes. They showed up on our border, 5 minutes ago, and now they're voting on how our elected leaders should govern us and should spend our tax dollars, which, of course, they're naturally going to vote should support them, right? They've done nothing for us at this point, despite all the, the shit you hear about, like, these are the dreamers, these are the future rocket science bullshit. The future rocket scientists, like, newsflash, if you're a rocket scientist, you can be a rocket scientist from Mexico City and we'll come get you. Or you'll be in charge of Mexico's space program, right? You don't flee Mexico and come begging for asylum in a country that's like, stupid. Okay, I'm going to try to make this video shorter. I want to thank I don't even get it, man. I made a video that was like an hour and a half, and I think like 15 people have watched it. This is absolutely insane that people are watching these videos. But to all of you that are sticking through this, like, I tried to watch it again, and it really was like irritating me that like I couldn't remember names, and since I'm not editing, because I'm just gonna I want to make it as raw as possible. And I don't want it to seem like polished or seem like I'm trying to, like, I watch people make videos, and it's like, you can tell there's like, to say like 2 or 3 sentences or make a point, you can see like 10 edits within a paragraph. And it's like, how many times do you need to say the same shit? But on the flip side of that, talking about a story and then forgetting names that you just said, when we were talking about Jordan Neely and, I know, I can't remember it. What was his name? Whatever. The white dude, curly hair military guy who was, found innocent. Anyway, but thank you for sticking around. Thank you for watching my videos. And I'm going to try to make these things like digestible in like 15 or under 20 minutes, and so that you guys can watch them without having to invest like an hour and a half or an hour or a big amount of time to hear what I'm trying to say, because a lot of it is just like me just sort of rambling, and I want to get to the point where I can stick to the point and make a video. All right, so this is June 16th, 2015. I'm imagining this is probably, let's see, a day. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, here it goes. Wow. Whoa. That is some group of people. Thousands. So nice. Thank you very much. That's really nice. Thank you. It's great to be at Trump Tower. It's great to be in a wonderful city, New York, and it's an honor to have everybody here. This is beyond anybody's expectations. There's been no crowd like this. And I can tell some of the candidates, they went in, they didn't know the air conditioner didn't work. They sweated like dogs. They didn't know the room was too big because they didn't have anybody here. How are they going to beat ISIS? I don't think it's going to happen. Our country is in serious trouble. We don't have victories anymore. We used to have victories, but we don't have them. When was the last time anybody saw us beating, let's say, China in a trade deal? They kill us. I beat China all the time. When did we beat Japan at anything? They send us their cars over by the millions, and what do? When was the last time we saw a Chevrolet in Tokyo? It doesn't exist, folks. They beat us all the time. When do we beat Mexico at the border? They're laughing at us, at our stupidity, and now they're beating us economically. They are not our friend, believe me, and they're killing us economically. The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems. Thank you, it's true. And these are the best and the finest. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems. And they're bringing those problems with us. You probably should have said them. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. And some, I assume, are good people. But I speak to border guards and they tell us what we're getting. And it only makes common sense. It only makes common sense. They're sending us not the right people. It's coming more from Mexico. It's coming from all over South and Latin America. And it's coming probably from the Middle East. But we don't know because we have no protection and we have no competence. We don't know what's happening, and it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop fast. Islamic terrorism is eating up large portions of the Middle East. They become rich. I'm in competition with them. They just built a hotel in Syria. Can you believe this? They built a hotel. When I have to build a hotel, I pay interest. They don't have to pay interest because they took the oil that when we left Iraq, I said we should have taken it. So now ISIS has the oil, and what they don't have, Iran has. And and I will tell you this, and I said this very strongly. Years ago I said, and I love the military, and I want to have the strongest military that we've ever had, and we need it now more than ever. But I said, don't hit Iraq, because you're going to totally destabilize the Middle East. Iran is going to take over the Middle East. Iran and somebody else will get the oil, and it turned out that Iran is taking over Iraq. Think of it. Iran is taking over Iraq, and they're taking it over big league. We spent $2 trillion in Iraq, $2 trillion. We lost thousands of lives, thousands in Iraq. We have wounded soldiers who I love. They're great all over the place. Thousands and thousands of wounded soldiers. And we have nothing. We can't even go there. We have nothing. And every time we give Iraq equipment, the first time a bullet goes off in the air, they leave it. So true. I mean, think about Biden abandoning $80 billion in military weaponry. So, here it goes. More. Last week I read 23 Humvees, these are big vehicles, were left behind for the enemy. 2,000. So she's talking about Iraq and abandoning all these weapon systems, all this military hardware, abandoned it in Iraq, like Biden then turned around and abandoned in Afghanistan. And that's the hustle. It's like, that's why that's why they were opposed to Trump. Not only was he trying to stop, the cheap labor that both the Uniparty support, but like there's a military industrial complex, a machine that when we have war and military hardware gets used and it gets abandoned, we have to buy more. And so the American people just keep getting bilked and bilked for more and more. And every time there's a war, and $1 trillion in Humvees, I'm about to say it, gets left behind. That's 2,300 more Humvees that the American taxpayer need to buy. And they just left them in the Middle East to be used, I am assuming, by, at the time, ISIS, to kill Americans. And it's like such a racket. And Trump knew it. And Trump was calling out the establishment, the DC establishment, and he was the very first president who actually came in, who was self-funded. He came in a billionaire. He made his money in the free market. He wasn't like one of these people who, showed up in their early 20s and works for 50 years and gets paid $170,000 a year as a congressman, and somehow when they retire they're worth $200 million. And that's not to mention the free healthcare. They don't pay income taxes, just the free security, the free frank mailing, everything that these people get, the top-notch healthcare. And so I'll get back to the speech. Last week I read 2,300 Humvees. These are big vehicles, were left behind for the enemy. 2,000, ? You would say maybe 2, maybe 4, but 2,300 sophisticated vehicles, they ran, and the enemy took them. Last quarter was just announced our gross domestic product, a sign of strength, right? But not for us. It was below zero. Who ever heard of this? It's never been below zero. Our labor participation rate was the worst since 1978. But think of it. GDP below zero, horrible labor participation rate, and our real unemployment is anywhere from 18 to 20%. Don't believe the 5.6. Don't believe it. That the Obama administration was reporting 5.6 unemployment. Bullshit. That's right. A lot of people up there that can't get jobs. They can't get jobs because there are no jobs, because China has our jobs and Mexico has our jobs. They all have jobs, but the real number is anywhere from 18 to 19 to maybe even 21%, and nobody talks about it because it's a statistic that's full of nonsense. Our enemies are getting stronger, by the way, and we as a country are getting weaker. Even our nuclear arsenal doesn't work. It came out recently. They have equipment that's 30 years old. They don't even know if it worked. And I thought it was horrible. And it was a broadcast on television because, boy, does that send signals to Putin and all of the other people that look at us and they say, that is a group of people. And that is a nation that truly has no clue. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. We have a disaster called the big lie, Obamacare. Obamacare. Says it twice. Yesterday it came out that so blah blah blah. This just goes on where he's just calling out the establishment, Democrat, Republican. It doesn't matter. It's all owned by special interests, by the multinational corporations, the pharmaceutical companies, the military-industrial complex, the energy companies, and they pay for they make donations to get people elected, and people come into office and they start supporting policies and voting on budgets that put them first and really fuck the American people, right? And so Trump was the first guy who came in. And a lot of people don't know this, but he donated every single paycheck that he got. U.S. presidents make $400,000 a year. He donated, I think the first one was to like an opiate or like a drug rehabilitation center. I mean, he was doing all kinds of stuff that was like nobody's ever done. Absolutely, if anybody else had done it, they would have called him like, "Can you believe this guy is Mother Teresa?" But Trump came in. He's brash. He will completely tear you down if you insult him or you think that you can talk down to him because he's not a professional politician. He's going to completely smoke you, right? And so he came in and he was a ladies' man. He didn't have a good didn't have a bad track record, but he didn't have a great track record. Like, he'd been divorced. He probably had some affairs. We know he paid a non-disclosure agreement. He liked his women, right? Who hasn't done that in politics, in Hollywood, whatever. But he had everything properly diagnosed, right? Especially illegal immigration. And at the time, I was really watching like the immigration from North Africa and the Middle East into Europe at the time. That's when there was the big human migration, and I just remember thinking like, God, I'm so glad that that's not us. And listening to I started really paying attention to immigration and whatnot. And I remember there was a dude named Milton Freeman, I think it was. And he said that he's an economist and a really smart guy that people listen to. And he said that you can have open borders and you can have a robust social welfare safety net. But you can't have both, right? You can't have unlimited, unchecked immigration and be very liberal and very generous with welfare programs, because the entire world will illegally immigrate to your country. And it's a supply and demand issue. It's like there's only so many people paying taxes, right? The employed people in America, let's say it's 80% or whatever, and the population of the country is somewhere around like 360 million, right? So if you look at let's say at any given time, there's 300 million people that are employed. And all that money is where the federal government gets its money to run all these programs. Are the most expensive military in the world, these endless wars. 200 billion gets dropped off by a unilateral decision by Biden to just dump 200 billion into Ukraine. Oh, and by the way, 6 billion is unaccounted for because of an accounting error. Right? So these are like there's like a lot of money that gets like in taxes that gets collected, but a lot of money that goes out, even more money that goes out. And that's why we have a incredible national debt, right? So when Trump came in and he started talking about immigration, and he started pointing out like that not only can we not, is this non-sustainable, but like who are we getting? Like who's really coming here? That's when we first started hearing like Trump's a racist, Trump's a xenophobic, Islamophobe. That was also when ISIS was taking place, and right, we had the that shooting at the nightclub in Florida that was like an ISIS member who like shot up a gay club and killed like 52 people. And then I think there was another one in like somewhere in California. Where was that? Like Fresno or something, where it was like another sort of like Islamic inspired. And then there was the Pulse nightclub was the gay club, right? And then there was the attack at the what was her name? The little pop star. I forgot her name, but ISIS attacked her concert and like a bunch of little girls were killed. Remember that? And then there was the Bataclan, I think it was the Bataclan Theater in Paris, in which they just massacred hundreds of people. Like 5 members of ISIS like stormed into this 2-story like oh yeah, the Eagles of Death Metal were playing. Yeah, I remember. Jeez. Anyway, so there was like a lot of like violence that was starting to be exported out of the Middle East into Europe at the same time that there was like this mass migration from North Africa, the Middle East, into Europe. And Trump was smart enough to see it coming, right? We already had 9/11 back in 2001. Before that, I think 7 years earlier, we had the first attack on the World Trade Center, the truck bomb. That Ramzi Youssef dude who drove I want to say it was like a truck, some sort of like whatever delivery truck into the basement and blew it up. Obviously didn't take it down, but like, so the attacks have started coming and started being like exported out of the Middle East, and it started arriving here in America. And then with ISIS, when ISIS came in, Islamic State, we started seeing like these like lone wolf people that were like claiming allegiance to ISIS and the caliphate, and they were taking it upon themselves to like commit these killings. But a lot of it had to do with like just like this massive amount of immigration that was like changing culture, and it was like changing like the idea of assimilation being something that a country needs its immigrant population to do. I mean, when our ancestors immigrated to America, they had to learn the language. They had to assimilate into the local customs if they wanted to get a job, if they wanted to provide any value to the local people. I mean, you can't come in speaking a different language and have no common shared I mean, I don't even know, common interests and commonalities, things that like people, the culture, right? So that was Trump in 2015. And now fast forward almost 10 years. And we now have people on the subway who are not doing jack shit, but sitting around and smoking K2 all day and getting completely hella drunk and lighting people on fire. And I guess this guy used a shirt to like fan the flames on this girl. And this dude is just an absolute subhuman piece of fucking dog shit. And, you know, like, remember, Trump got called the next Hitler because he suggested that there were people that were not the best people, right? Didn't he say that? He said, like, when they're coming, they're not sending their best. They're not sending their doctors and lawyers. They're not sending their rocket scientists. They're sending the people that, like, have nothing better to do but to walk across a desert and try to get free shit out of the most generous country in the world. Right? They pass through 50 countries to get to us. You know, the typical asylum law is that the first country you enter is the country you claim asylum in. And somehow it's like, you know, when it comes to Americans, we just get walked over, whether it's NATO, whether it's the World Health Organization. We are constantly allowing ourselves to get used, to get manipulated, our laws to get ignored. And it's always because if we stand up for ourselves, we're mean. And because, like, we're Americans and we're successful, well, we must have stole it, right? I mean, that's the left's entire narrative, is that, like, any sort of discrepancy that indicates that we have more or we have better, it can't be from hard work. It can't be from like a spirit that's like a frontiersman spirit, a revolutionary spirit. It's got to be that, like, we stole the land and we enslaved people, and that's how we got it. Like, I mean, everything, they always take America's past history completely out of context, and they compare it by today's moral and ethical standards, right? And they compare it to every other country's standards today. They don't realize, like, back when we had slaves, well, so did every other country, right? And in the Middle East, they just killed their slaves, which is why in the Middle East there's no black people, right? Because they just killed theirs. In America, and this is controversial and people get called racist for saying it, but it's the absolute truth. Slave owners realized that taking care of your slaves meant that they would be more productive, right? You can't have a dude that's starving to death, like, be a hard worker. I mean, common sense. But whatever, I'm not arguing, trust me, I'm not arguing for slavery, I'm not. But what I'm saying is that at the time that America was dealing with its growing pains and its early with slavery, so is every other country. And, you know, I think America and, or the U.S., and I think there's only one other country that actually fought civil wars to end slavery. You know, and there still is slavery in some countries, right? You won't get anybody to talk about it, but the Uyghurs in China are slaves. The North Korean people are slaves. In fact, their entire military got sent over to the Ukraine to try to help Russia fight their battle. And of course, they got smoked because that's an army that's never been tested. You know, they're like a pageant army that walks around with like high stepping with like swords and old muskets. But when it comes to war, dude, like, they're not like our special operations dudes that have been like kicking doors in and doing like killer capture raids at 3 a.m. for the past 25 years, right? Like the American military learned how to be the best war fighters in the world because of our wars that we're constantly fighting, right? Back in early 90s, when we hadn't been to war since Grenada, or really Vietnam was the last real war, but there were some skirmishes in South America and whatnot. We had generations of people who went into the military, did their 4 years or, a couple, 10 years or whatever, and never went to war. And then you had the Bush 1 invasion when we were protecting Kuwait. And that was like the war that like lasted a day. And then back, I think it was 2003 when we were invaded again, 11 or 12 years later. And we stayed there for a long time, and we tried to change. We tried to implement our democracy style of government in the Middle East, where we have different cultures. Like, we have we have freedom of religion. So, we're not going to allow someone's religion to dictate how our laws are made or carried out, right? But they do. And who are we to tell them that that's the wrong way to do it? It wasn't until Saddam Hussein was killed and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, these were secular leaders that like crushed any sort of Islamist revolutionaries. They just crushed them with overwhelming violence and brutality. And some people just aren't cut out for being free. And, when you're the Iraqi people who've been governed by a dictator, a secular dictator for, 50 years, sometimes you just can't deal with a democratic freedom because, inevitably you're always going to get the most powerful group that's willing to do the most damage. It's going to rise to the top. And it's when it's a bunch of Islamists who believe that like jihad is the way, democracy is probably not going to work for you. So anyway, so that's that. So let's fast forward from 2015 when Trump gave the Golden Escalator speech, and he predicted that there would be that they weren't sending their best and they're sending rapists, and that the media immediately tried to reframe what he was talking about by saying that he's a racist, he's an Islamophobe, he's all these things that were meant to basically smear him as a racist, an evil next Hitler. And once you do that, you essentially you silence that person because they lose all legitimacy within like civil society, right? If you're a Nazi or you're a racist, nobody cares what you think, right? You have lost your ability to be a part of the decision-making political process. And so that's what they were attempting to do with Trump. They were trying to make him out to be a racist when he was really just being a realist. He wasn't living with this idealistic sort of like, it's all, unicorns and rainbows and everybody who's coming here is just seeking a better life and shit. It's like, there's a lot of bad people in the world. And we should probably be checking who we're allowing into our country. Right? And he got called a racist for that. And so now we fast forward to 2 weeks ago or last week. Okay. Here's what I learned today. I learned that this dude named, I gotta find it real quick. I'm just learning how to make videos, so it's not all polished and shit, but I think you guys understand that. This dude was named Sebastian Zepeda, right? He was arrested for lighting the woman on fire on a New York City subway. And it's important to talk about because what we have now found out is the dude doesn't remember lighting her on fire. And his bunkmate at the local homeless shelter where he stayed, he's a Guatemalan migrant, um, who was chain smoking, apparently, according to this dude's bunkmate, a synthetic drug called K2. The homeless shelter's roommate now suggests that he would leave and go out all day, and he would come home absolutely just blackout drunk. And he would be like real weird, and they showed a video of him. Like the dude would take videos of himself, and he was like talking to strangers on the subway. It was wild. And it's exactly the shit that I saw working in the crisis detox in Phoenix. And every time I would be like, what is this dude like detoxing from? Because at the time, the most gnarliest drug was meth, right? And we would see people in meth detox. And, but these people were coming in and they had the violent side of them, right? The K2 people, like they had the like chew a hole in your hand shit, just wild. So synthetic drug spice, and it's in the legal gray zone. We talked about that, where it's constantly having the chemical composition switched around so that the government can never really, the DEA, has a drug that's on the books, but because this has a different chemical structure by like one molecule, it's not the same thing. And so now they have to like start a whole new process to get this drug banned. And so now, homeless migrants can buy this shit for $5 at the local smoke shop, and sit around on subways all day and light people on fire, right? So this dude, Raymond Robinson, was a bunkmate of his in the shelter. And he told the New York Post that the migrant was a heavy drinker who, quote, bugged out when smoking K2. He smoked K2 and drank, and these are his quotes, and bugged out. He would bug out and talk to himself when he was high, but he never harmed nobody but himself when he wasn't high. He'd talk like we were talking regular. Zepeda told police that he was so drunk that he did not remember lighting the woman on fire. So essentially, this dude was a tweaker, an alcoholic. He was the exact guy that Donald Trump described was flooding across our border. And that the Democratic Party and Time Magazine and the New York Times and CNN and MSNBC and NBC and ABC and U.S. News and World Report, everybody called Trump a racist. Because he said that people should be ID'd and we should know who's coming. I mean, that's like rule number one for dummies of how to protect and defend your country. I mean, that is the primary function of the U.S. president, is to protect and defend the people of the United States of America. It's not to send $200 billion over to Ukraine. It's not to use your son as a money laundering, cocaine sniffing, human sex trafficker, right? And remember, like when Trump suggested to Zelensky that he should possibly, investigate some of the things that Biden had said, talking about that $1 billion U.S. aid package, that Biden said, like, I gave him 7 hours, and I told him that when I got back on this plane, if the prosecutor that's investigating my son Hunter, And the owner of Burisma Energy Company, if that prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. And like Biden was so proud of himself, he thought he was such a badass that he controlled the money. And he was blatantly just talking about corruption. And then what they didn't realize is that, Trump was going to be running for president. And that's the exact kind of corruption that he was pointing out. And because Trump was so threatening to these people, they turned around and made him the bad guy, right? And they tried to impeach him for the quid pro quo of talking to Zelensky and suggesting that Zelensky should have Biden looked at. And so, you had Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff and all those idiots investigate whether Trump was a traitor to the country because he had talked to Zelensky about investigating. And so what did Biden recently do? He issued a complete pardon that's like an umbrella pardon that covers the sun, all the way back to 2014, conveniently. So, basically covering the time that Trump was suggesting that his son was breaking the law and working as an unregistered foreign agent, in addition to being a drug smuggling, drug using, human sex trafficking, money laundering scumbag, right? So Trump makes a speech, says that we should secure our borders, and the attack started, and it really never ended. And it still hasn't ended. The saving grace has been that the American people, because of the incredible amount of the lawfare, you keep hearing that term, the partisan witch hunt where they're everybody has these documents. When you leave the presidency, you have the ability to just declassify shit at will. So presidents take home shit from their office, and they've never been held criminally liable for having top secret information. Now somehow Biden, who never was president when he had it, he never had his house raided. Those boxes of classified information that were next to the Corvette, whatever. And then it turns out the FBI, remember when they did the 3 a.m. raid on Mar-a-Lago, and they went in with SWAT teams, the FBI went in with SWAT teams, and they went through Melania's underwear drawer, total violation of privacy. And it was all meant to completely paint him again as this corrupt criminal, this guy who's sneaking documents out. And it now turns out, which is why they're going to try to keep Kash Patel from being the FBI director and Tulsi Gabbard from being the director of Homeland Security. They're finding out that the FBI had brought in those packages. Remember the picture that was released from Trump's, supposedly from the closet where he was keeping all these documents, and they showed a box with all these documents scattered, and they had top secret, and they were bright red and all that shit. Turns out the FBI has whistleblowers that said that they brought those envelope covers, and that it was all done to totally build this sort of narrative that Trump was smuggling out classified documents, when really it was just a bunch of work shit that he took with him, and rightfully so. I mean, he needed protection from them, and so he had some documents. And of course, it always bites the guy when you have everybody working against you and everybody trying to take you off the ballot, everybody attacking you. And for some reason, this dude never has lost. He constantly wins. But the other part is he has truth on his side. And here we go again. I'm at 54 minutes, so I'm going to make this an hour video. He has truth on his side. And he has enough people like me, that were paying attention enough, and who were in positions where we didn't have our employer threatening. We could speak out, we could defend him, I guess we're called MAGA supporters, or we're like America First people or whatever. By the way, I didn't go to the Capitol. I never endorsed any violence or walking into the Capitol. Even though it's interesting that, like, radical Democrats, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, rightfully so, it was never a federal issue. It should each state should determine that for themselves. The citizens of each state should determine if the citizens in that state are going to be using their tax dollars to fund abortions for people who are financially unable to support themselves, right? And so they have sex and they don't use protection, and then they feel entitled, like it's a constitutional right, to terminate your pregnancy. And so people who are morally opposed to pregnancy should not be forced to have their tax dollars funded, right? Like nobody's tax dollars fund my shooting, right? And that's a constitutional right, guaranteeing my God-given right to defend myself, to self-defense, and the government's protection, guaranteeing protection of my God-given rights. And yet, I would never assume that, like, the taxpayers owe me or I'm entitled to them helping me fund my shooting or helping me pay for ammunition. Even though if there was an invasion, I would be one of the people that would be I would be part of the militia that's defending our homeland against armed invaders, right? Abortions do absolutely nothing except extinguish the life of an unborn child of a person. How is that anybody else's duty to help fund that? Now, if people vote for it and they decide that they want to help fund other people's abortions, I mean, I'm personally morally opposed to it, right? And so should Democrats. I mean, they're opposed to illegally crushing the eggs of endangered Galapagos sea turtles, right? The Endangered Species Act. I mean, if you accidentally kill these eggs, that's a federal crime. It's punishable by years in prison. And liberal Democrats have no problem punishing you for accidentally extinguishing the life of a potential Galapagos turtle. So the Galapagos turtle's potential for life, when it's still in its egg, non-incubated, and it still needs to hatch and fully recognize its potential as a turtle, but it's not a turtle at that point. And yet liberals have no problem calling that a turtle that deserves protection, and that people that kill it are immoral and deserve to be in prison. But somehow when it's a baby and they go in with forceps and they dissect a live baby, I mean, they pump it full of like some drug where it's paralyzed, and then they absolutely chop it to pieces and remove it. I mean, that's fucking disgusting, dude. And it's so immoral. But whatever, again, I'm not the kind of person that needs to, like, push my moral beliefs on you. If that's what you believe, then more power to you. Right? Not on my conscience, right? But you care about sea turtles more than you do human beings. That's interesting. Nevertheless, Trump was an outsider. He was self-funded. And by the way, his first act, they always called him a misogynistic Islamophobe. Remember that? Building up to his presidency, he's inaugurated, his first act as president was to negotiate a deal with Iran that freed a woman who was being held as a prisoner of, not war, but as a prisoner, a political prisoner, who had joint Iranian-American citizenship. Iran was calling her a spy. She had been in prison for a few years. Trump gets out. He negotiates the deal, didn't pay a penny for her. And his first act, very few people know this, because I've asked, and it seems that nobody knows it. his very first act as president was having a woman negotiating a deal that freed an Iranian woman, a Muslim woman, donated all his money, freed a woman, a Muslim woman, right? So much for being the Islamophobe misogynist. But he said some things that just threatened the establishment. It threatened all the benefits that illegal immigration has for big business, cheap employment, cheap food, cheap labor, keeping labor costs down, whatever. But he was pointing out the sanity in letting a bunch of people that we do not know who they are just come in unvetted, unchecked. And he called it 10 years before. And, there's when they're not sending their best. I'm sure some are good people, but what I'm hearing from these guards or these border patrol agents is they're sending who's coming over are rapists and drug addicts and whatnot. And here we have a dude who sat around all day. He would leave his homeless shelter. He would go get drunk and ride the subways all day and chain smoke K2 spice. And a woman who is sitting on a car, minding her own business, sleeping, I would imagine trying to stay out of the cold. Poor girl was probably homeless. And she got lit on fire by a K2 smoking Honduran or Guatemalan or Honduran, I can't remember. I think it's a Guatemalan. She got lit on by a Guatemalan tweaker. K2 smoking, psychopathic, alcoholic, drug addict who was up to no good and just getting high all day, gets deported, comes back because he knew he could. I mean, like if you travel, 3,000 or 4,000 miles and you get here and you get deported back to your country, the only way you're going to come back is if you know that the current leadership has no border, no patrol, no anything, and that even if they do catch you, they're going to release you in. So he was deported in 2018. And then Biden came into office with promises of free this and free that. And, we don't deport anybody and we don't give a shit about illegal immigration. And, Mayorkas never called it a humanitarian crisis. And what happened? A bunch of Americans, mostly women, have been raped, have been murdered, have been set on fire to die the most brutal death. And where are all these Democrats now? Like, where are they where? It seems to me that, they should be lining up begging Trump to allow them to apologize for saying that he was a racist and he was the next Hitler, because he dared suggest that these are people that are coming in are probably not the best. And now they're proving it. They're lighting people on fire. They're raping, murdering. And all it's done is prove that, everything else, Trump is right. And everything he would ever say. I mean, even in the last the last debate, where he said, these Haitian migrants were eating people's cats and dogs and geese from that's a conspiracy theory. And anybody with Trump that has footage of Biden talking nonsense, those are cheap fakes, right? And it turns out that Biden was talking nonsense and he was getting lost walking off stage. And the establishment Democrats were lying to your face, trying to get him back into office so they could use him as their puppet for another 4 years, while their Jake Sullivans sit in the back in the shadows and write the liberal woke leftist policies, far radical left policies that place Americans last, and that you believe in conspiracy theories and cheap fakes if you think that Biden's not doing this on all his own. And you support a racist, and you support a xenophobic Islamophobe if you listen to Trump and think that he might be onto something. Because now the data's in. The people that he said might be dangerous, there's a trail of bodies a mile long. And Trump's just been, I mean, all this has done is prove Trump right. And which is why he won in a landslide, and why there's now a national referendum to do mass deportations, and anybody standing in his way and Tom Homan's way is going to get fucking mowed over. And I'm here for it. And that's it. So we were at a minute or an hour 5. God, I sure can't talk. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Peace.